The vintage pour takes exactly 12 seconds, but I only had 10 to decide if I wanted to be a witness or a corpse. The crystal water carafe caught the light as Moore tilted it over the champagne flute, a practiced movement she'd perfected over 3 years of double shifts. Table 4 always ordered still water with their champagne. Old money habit, her manager had explained once. Dilutes the alcohol just enough to keep business sharp. Moore didn't care about their habits. She cared about the 847,000 won she still owed on her mother's legal retainer, due in 6 days. More bruschetta, please. Yoon Seo's voice was honey over ice, the kind of politeness that came from women who'd never had to ask twice for anything. Her engagement ring caught the chandelier light, a pink diamond the size of a quail egg, ostentatious even by these standards. Moore nodded, setting down the carafe. As she reached for the empty appetizer plate, Yoon Seo's phone lit up on the white tablecloth. The woman's perfectly manicured hand was slow to cover it, too confident in her invisibility. Too certain that waitresses didn't read, didn't think, didn't matter. But Moore saw it, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Vintage poured, target consumed, 30 seconds to cardiac event, confirm exit route. The words burned themselves into Moore's vision. She felt her fingers tighten around the porcelain plate and heard it creak under the pressure. Vintage. The 1947 Shadao Diaquam that Thwan had been savoring for the past 20 minutes, each sip deliberate, reverential. Moore's eyes flicked to the man across from Yoon Seo. Thwan sat like carved granite in his charcoal suit, his expression giving away nothing as he lifted the wine glass again. Everyone in Seoul knew his face. Everyone knew that he controlled the ports, the politicians, the invisible architecture of power that kept the city running. And everyone knew that when Thwan died, the vacuum would swallow districts whole. Yoon Seo smiled at him, soft and adoring. "Darling, you look pale. Are you feeling well?" Moore's heart hammered against her ribs. She could walk away, should walk away. Her mother's lawyer had been clear. Keep your head down, earn the money, survive. Getting involved in whatever this was, treason, assassination, the collapse of an empire, would bury her faster than any debt. But if Thwan died here tonight, the restaurant would be investigated. The staff would be questioned. And Moore, with her mother's trial hanging in the balance, couldn't afford even a shadow of suspicion. Her hand moved before her brain authorized it. She pulled the guest check from her apron, flipped it over, and grabbed the charcoal pencil she used for knotting dietary restrictions. 3 words, that's all she had time for. "Don't drink it." She folded the paper once, twice, and slid it beneath the edge of Thwan's dessert menu as she collected the bruschetta plate. His eyes met hers for half a heartbeat, dark, unreadable, sharp enough to cut. Then his hand moved toward the wine glass, and Moore couldn't breathe. Thwan's fingers stopped an inch from the stem of the wine glass. Moore forced herself to keep moving, to step back toward the kitchen like her world hadn't just fractured. Behind her, she heard the whisper of paper unfolding. The silence at table 4 stretched too long, pulled too tight. "What is this?" Thwan's voice carried the weight of falling mountains. Moore was 5 steps away when Yoon Seo laughed, light and musical. "Darling, what?" The wine glass shattered against the marble floor. Everything happened in the space between heartbeats. Thwan surged to his feet, his chair clattering backward. Yoon Seo's hand darted into her Hermes clutch. The elderly couple at table 7 looked up from their lobster thermidor. Then the first shot cracked through the dining room's cathedral hush. Moore dropped, pure instinct, honed from a childhood in Itaewon's back alleys, where you learned the difference between fireworks and gunfire before you learned to read. The porcelain plate exploded against the wall above her head, raining white shrapnel into her hair. She looked up from the floor. Yoon Seo stood with a pearl-handled pistol extended, her expression no longer honey but surgical steel. But Thwan had moved at an impossible speed for a man his size behind a marble column. The bullet had torn through his jacket sleeve, leaving a dark bloom spreading across the fabric. "You stupid, sentimental fool," Yoon Seo said, her voice stripped of all pretense. You were supposed to drink it and die quietly. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Diners screamed, scrambling for exits. But Moore saw what they didn't see: 3 men in server uniforms converging on Thwan's position, their movements too coordinated, too purposeful. One of them was Jinho, who'd trained her on the espresso machine her first week. Jinho's hand emerged from beneath his serving tray, holding a Glock. Moore didn't think. She grabbed the water carafe from where it had rolled beneath table 3 and hurled it. The crystal caught Jinho square in the temple. He staggered, his shot going wide, punching through the Rothko on the west wall. Thwan's eyes found hers across the chaos. Something passed between them: recognition, calculation, a debt acknowledged. Then he moved like violence incarnate. He caught Jinho's wrist, twisted until bone cracked, and relieved him of the Glock in one fluid motion. 2 shots. The other fake servers dropped before they could adjust their aim. Yoon Seo was already running, her Laobaotins discarded, sprinting barefoot toward the kitchen entrance. But she turned at the threshold, her pistol trained not on Thwan, but on Moore. "The waitress," she said, her smile returning, cold and perfect. "How wonderfully inconvenient." Moore couldn't move. The barrel looked impossibly large, impossibly black. Thwan's shot took Yoon Seo in the shoulder. She spun with the impact, her gun clattering across the tile, and disappeared through the kitchen doors. The dining room fell silent except for distant sirens. Thwan walked toward Moore, his injured arm hanging useless at his side, blood dripping onto the Carrara marble. He stood over her, this man who controlled half of Seoul's underworld, and extended his good hand. "It seems," he said, his voice remarkably steady, "that you've just made the worst decision of your life." Moore took his hand. Her fingers came away red. "Or the only one that mattered," she heard herself say. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and steam, and for once, Moore's invisibility became an advantage. She knew every corner, every exit, every blind spot where the security cameras didn't reach. 3 years of double shifts had mapped this place into her muscle memory. "This way." She pulled Thwan past the prep stations where line cooks stood frozen, knives suspended over cutting boards. No one would meet her eyes. No one would remember seeing her. That was the gift of being nobody. Thwan moved like a wounded wolf, his breathing controlled despite the blood soaking through his sleeve. "The back entrance is where they'll be waiting." Moore shouldered open the door to the storage corridor, the one management forgot existed. "Trust me or die here. Choose fast." He followed without argument. Smart man. The corridor smelled like cardboard and desperation, lined with boxes of imported truffles and cases of wine that cost more than Moore's annual salary. She navigated it in the dark, counting doors by touch. Behind them, she heard shouting. Yoon Seo's voice, sharp with authority even through pain. "Find them! The waitress knows the building." Moore's hand found the service exit, the one the dishwashers used for smoke breaks. She slammed the push bar, and they spilled into the alley just as the sky opened up. Seoul's rain was never gentle. It came down like judgment, cold and absolute, turning the narrow alley into a river of neon reflections. The Gangnam district glittered above them, all glass and money, while down here the city showed its bones, dumpsters, fire escapes, the architecture of survival. "Can you run?" Moore asked. Thwan's face was pale in the sodium light, his jaw locked tight. "Can you?" She took that as a yes and ran. Her canvas work shoes slapped through puddles as she led him deeper into the maze of service alleys she'd memorized during 3 years of late-night walks home. Left past the dumpling restaurant's steam vents, right where the boutique threw out last season's damaged silks, straight through the gap between buildings that only existed because someone had miscalculated property lines in 1987. Behind them, footsteps echoed, Yoon Seo's people closing in. Moore ducked under a low-hanging fire escape and pulled Thwan after her. They pressed against the wall, rain hammering the metal above their heads. Their breathing loud in the confined space. 3 men ran past, their suits too expensive for this part of the city, their purpose written in the guns they carried openly. When the footsteps faded, Thwan spoke, his voice rough. Why? Why what? Why save me? His eyes found hers in the darkness. You don't know me, you owe me nothing. Moore thought of her mother in that courtroom, small and tired. Thought of the debt that would crush them both. Thought of the text message on Yoon Seo's phone and the casual certainty that a man could be erased over dinner. Someone had to, she said finally, and I was the only one who could. Thwan studied her for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, blood and water mixing on his ruined shirt. Then he nodded, as if she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. Then you're coming with me, he said, because now you're the only person in Seoul I can trust, and the most dangerous woman Yoon Seo will want dead. Moore looked back at the alley, at the restaurant's distant glow, at everything she'd been before tonight. Then she stepped into the rain and followed the monster into the dark. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building that didn't officially exist on any city registry. Moore learned this in the private elevator that required a fingerprint, retinal scan, and a 16-digit code Thwan entered one-handed, his injured arm cradled against his ribs. The doors opened into silence and shadows. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Seoul spread below them like scattered diamonds, the Han River a dark ribbon cutting through the light. The space was austere black leather, glass surfaces, nothing soft except the rain drumming against the windows. No photographs, no personal touches. A fortress designed by someone who trusted nothing, not even memory. Sit, Thwan gestured to the sofa before disappearing through a doorway. Moore remained standing, her wet shoes creating puddles on the marble floor. She was acutely aware that she was still wearing her uniform, the white blouse now transparent with rain and splattered with someone else's blood. Her fingers found the name tag pinned above her heart, Moore, server, and she pulled it off, the pin leaving a small hole in the fabric. Thwan returned with a first aid kit that looked military grade and a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than her mother's legal fees. He'd removed his jacket and dress shirt. The bullet had carved a furrow across his bicep, deep but clean. You know how to suture. He sat, laid out supplies with his good hand. I've stitched my own cuts before. Moore moved closer, her hands steadier than they should have been. Different context. Survival is survival. He poured whiskey over the wound without flinching. The method doesn't care about the setting. She worked in silence, her needle pulling thread through skin with the same precision she'd used to fold napkins into swans. Thwan watched her face, not the wound, his dark eyes reading something she couldn't name. You're not afraid, he observed. I'm terrified, Moore tied off the final stitch. I'm just used to not showing it. Good. He tested his arm, nodded approval at her work. Fear that shows gets you killed. Fear that hides keeps you breathing. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pressed one into her hand. Moore had never developed a taste for expensive alcohol. It all burned the same way, but she drank anyway. The warmth spread through her chest, temporary courage against the reality settling in. Your mother, Thwan said. It wasn't a question. The legal fees you've been drowning in. I make it my business to know the vulnerabilities of everyone in my territory. Moore's fingers tightened on the glass. Then you know I can't afford to be here. Can't afford to be involved in whatever war you're fighting with your fiancé. Ex-fiancé. His smile was surgical. And you're already involved. The moment you passed me that note, you declared allegiance. He stood, moved to the windows, his silhouette backlit by the city. Yoon Seo has spent 18 months infiltrating my organization. Every lieutenant, every accountant, every person I trusted, she's either bought or broken them. Do you understand what that means? Moore understood. She'd watched her mother's colleagues testify against her one by one, their loyalty purchased by prosecutors who promised lighter sentences. Betrayal was economics, not emotion. It means everyone close to you is compromised, she said quietly. Everyone except you. Thwan turned, and for the first time she saw something other than calculation in his expression, Something that might have been exhaustion or loneliness or the terrible weight of realizing you've been sleeping next to an assassin. You're the only person in Seoul who gains nothing from my death. The only one who had no reason to save me except... He paused. Why did you? Moore thought about lying. About giving him something strategic, something that would make sense in his world of leverage and debt. Instead, she told the truth. Because I've spent 3 years being invisible. Being the person who pours water and clears plates doesn't matter. She met his eyes. And when I saw that text, I realized that matter costs something, but not mattering costs everything. Thwan studied her for a long moment. Then he raised his glass. Then welcome to matter, Moore. His smile was dangerous, promising. I hope you survive it. The gala was everything Moore had served, but never attended a crystalline fantasy of wealth wrapped in designer gowns and political ambition. The Shilla Hotel ballroom glittered with Seoul's elite, their laughter floating above a string quartet's rendition of Vivaldi. Moore moved through them like smoke. The catering uniform fit perfectly. Thwan's people had procured it within hours, complete with the proper credentials and a name tag that read J.I. Young, temporary staff. No one looked at temporary staff. No one remembered their faces. The office is on the 3rd floor, East Wing. Thwan's voice was crisp in the earpiece hidden beneath her hair. Yoon Seo keeps her operational files separate from mine. Insurance, she called it. I called it prudence. Moore balanced a tray of champagne flutes, weaving between conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in Jeju. She caught fragments of a minister's daughter's engagement, a merger that would reshape the tech sector, and speculation about Thwan's sudden illness that had kept him from tonight's event. They think you're dying, Moore murmured, her lips barely moving as she offered champagne to a cluster of businessmen who didn't acknowledge her existence. Good, let them plan my funeral. His voice carried dark satisfaction. It makes them careless. She reached the service corridor, slipping away from the crowd with practiced ease. The 3rd floor was quieter, carpeted in burgundy silence. Moore counted doors until she found the one marked private authorized personnel only. The lock was electronic, high-end but not military grade. 20 seconds, she told Thwan, pulling the bypass key from her sleeve, a gift from one of his remaining loyal security specialists. The device hummed against the lock, algorithms racing through possibilities. 15 seconds. Footsteps approached from the stairwell. 10 seconds. The footsteps grew louder, purposeful. 5 seconds. The lock clicked green. Moore pushed inside and closed the door just as someone rounded the corner. She pressed her back against the wood, her heart a drum solo against her ribs, listening to the footsteps pause, then continue past. I'm in, she whispered. The office was meticulously organized floor-to-ceiling shelves, labeled files, and a desk that cost more than Moore's annual rent. But it was the locked cabinet behind the Kandinsky print that held what they needed. Thwan had described its location exactly. He'd stood in this room 100 times, never knowing what it contained. Moore pulled the print aside, revealing a biometric safe. This one required a fingerprint she didn't have. Problem, she said. Use the gel pack, left interior pocket. She found a thin silicone sheet embossed with Yoon Seo's fingerprint, lifted from a wine glass 3 nights ago by someone who'd since disappeared. Moore pressed it against the scanner, holding her breath. The safe opened with a pneumatic sigh. Inside were 3 folders, each labeled with corporate names Moore didn't recognize. She photographed every page with the phone Thwan had given her, her hands steady despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. Bank transfers, meeting minutes, photographs of Thwan's lieutenants with their throats cut. And at the bottom, a contract. Moore's blood turned to ice as she read it. Yoon Seo hadn't just been planning Thwan's assassination, she'd been selling his territories piece by piece to the Buson's syndicate, the same organization that had been trying to breach Seoul's borders for a decade. The wedding was supposed to be a distraction, the honeymoon and his funeral. Are you seeing this? Moore whispered, angling the phone's camera. Thwan's silence stretched too long. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of continents shifting. Every name on that list is someone I broke bread with, someone I trusted. A pause. Photograph everything. We're burning her empire to ash. Moore was closing the safe when she heard the distinct click of a door handle turning. She froze. The office door swung open. Yoon Seo stood on the threshold, her arm in an elegant sling that matched her crimson gown, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Hello, little ghost," she said softly. "I was wondering when Thwan would send his new pet to steal from me." Moore's hand found the serving tray she'd set down, her fingers wrapping around its edge. Not much of a weapon, but it was something. Yoon Seo laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, this will be fun." Moore swung the tray in a wide arc, champagne glasses exploding against Yoon Seo's shoulder. The woman staggered backward, more from surprise than impact, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment. It was enough. Moore bolted past her, the folders clutched against her chest, her shoes finding purchase on the burgundy carpet. Behind her, Yoon Seo's voice cut through the corridor like a blade. "Security! East Wing now!" "Thwan," Moore gasped into the earpiece. "Service stairs, end of the hall. Black sedan, south entrance. Run." She ran. The stairwell was concrete and echoes, her footsteps multiplying against the walls. Above her, doors slammed open. Below her, voices coordinated her capture. Moore took the stairs 3 at a time, her lungs burning, the folders slippery with her sweat. She burst through the ground floor exit into the rain-soaked night. The black sedan's headlights flared to life, and she threw herself into the back seat as bullets sparked off the hotel's marble facade. Thwan was behind the wheel, his injured arm somehow managing the gear shift. They peeled away from the curb as security flooded the entrance, their weapons drawn but useless against the armored car already disappearing into Seoul's arterial traffic. Moore couldn't catch her breath, couldn't stop shaking. "I got them," she managed. "All the files, the contracts, everything." Thwan said nothing until they'd crossed the river, until the safe house appeared a nondescript building in Mapogu where money and violence intersected behind soundproof walls. He parked in the underground garage and finally looked at her. "You hesitated." Moore blinked. "What?" "When Yoon Seo walked in." His eyes were obsidian in the dim light. "You had 3 seconds before she recognized you. You could have neutralized her. Instead, you threw a tray and ran." "I got the files." "You let her live." Thwan's voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. "And now she knows you're working with me. She knows you're valuable. She knows exactly how to hurt me." Moore's hands tightened on the folders. "I'm not a killer." "No, you're not." He got out of the car, gesturing for her to follow. "That's the problem." The safe house's interior was Spartan. A table, chairs, weapons mounted on the walls like art. Thwan spread the photographed documents across the table, his expression unreadable as he studied the evidence of his fiancée's betrayal. "Mercy," he said finally, "is a luxury for the poor. People like you who have nothing to lose can afford to let enemies walk away. But people like me..." He looked up, and Moore saw something cold and ancient in his gaze. "Every act of mercy is a future threat. Every enemy left breathing is a knife waiting for your back." "So I should have killed her," Moore's voice cracked. "Just what stabbed her in a hotel hallway?" "Yes, no hesitation, no remorse. Because now she'll kill someone you love to prove a point. Your mother, perhaps, or that neighbor who walks your mother's dog, or the lawyer trying to save her life." He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "In my world, Moore, kindness is blood in the water. It tells predators exactly where to bite." Moore wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be another way, that she wasn't built for this kind of arithmetic where human lives were subtracted with surgical precision. But she thought of her mother's trial, thought of the witnesses who'd turned on her, the prosecutors who'd twisted every act of compassion into evidence of guilt, thought of Yoon Seo's smile as she'd raised that pearl-handled pistol. "Teach me," Moore heard herself say. Thwan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Approval, or perhaps recognition. "First lesson," he said, pulling a knife from the wall display. "Everyone is capable of violence. The question is whether you'll commit to it before or after the people you love are dead." He placed the knife on the table between them, its blade catching the fluorescent light. Yoon Seo has 3 safe houses, 2 legitimate business fronts, and a younger sister studying art in Paris who knows nothing about her family's activities. His voice was clinical, educational. To dismantle her operation, we need to be willing to burn everything she values until she has nothing left but surrender. Moore looked at the knife, at the files, at the man who'd gone from victim to strategist in the span of days. Even the sister. Especially the sister. Thwan's smile was winter itself. Because mercy is a luxury, Moore, and we can no longer afford to be poor. Moore picked up the knife. Its weight was foreign in her palm, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to examine. But she didn't put it down. The message arrived at 3 a.m., a single photograph sent to Thwan's secure line. Moore's mother, sitting in her small apartment, unaware of the camera capturing her through the window. Below the image, 5 words, "Sunrise, Incheon shipyard, come alone." "It's a trap," Moore said, staring at her mother's face on the screen, tired, innocent, reading a book in her threadbare armchair. Obviously, Thwan was already loading weapons, his movements economical. "But it's a trap we have to walk into." She said alone. "And if I go alone, I die. If I don't go, your mother dies." He slid a pistol across the table. "So we go together, and we make sure Yoon Seo regrets using leverage she can't afford to spend." The Incheon shipyard was a graveyard of rusting vessels, their hulls looming like skeletal cathedrals in the pre-dawn gray. The air tasted of salt and decay, and the only sound was the slap of waves against corroded metal. Moore followed Thwan through the maze of containers and dry docks, the pistol heavy in her waistband. She'd spent the previous hour learning to load it, aim it, fire it. The mechanics were simple. The commitment was not. "There," Thwan pointed to the largest ship, a decommissioned freighter listing to starboard. Light flickered in its bridge candles, maybe, or someone's idea of theater. They climbed the gangway in silence. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every sound could be the last thing they heard. Yoon Seo waited on the bridge, backlit by dawn breaking over the yellow sea. Her arm was out of the sling now, healed enough to hold the same pearl-handled pistol she'd used at the restaurant. Around her stood 6 men, their weapons trained on the doorway. "You brought her." Yoon Seo's smile was radiant. "How sentimental." "You wanted to be alone. I brought my witness." Thwan's voice was granite. "Where's the mother?" "Safe, for now." Yoon Seo gestured, and one of her men pulled up a video feed on a tablet of Moore's mother, now bound to a chair in some concrete room, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I've learned from our last encounter. No more chances for heroic waitresses to interfere." Moore's vision tunneled. Her hand moved toward the pistol. Thwan's fingers caught her wrist, a warning pressure. "Not yet." "What do you want?" he asked Yoon Seo. "For you to finally die." She raised her pistol, leveling it at Thwan's chest. "No poison this time. No elaborate plans. Just a bullet and a body that washes up in Incheon Harbor, another casualty of gang violence that the police will never solve." "And her," Thwan nodded toward Moore. "Oh, she gets to watch. Then she gets to join you." Yoon Seo's finger moved to the trigger. "Consider it a mercy you'll die together, and I'll let her mother believe it was an accident. I'm not completely heartless." Time crystallized. Moore saw it all with perfect clarity, the 6 men. Their positions, their lines of fire. Thwan's body positioned deliberately between her and the weapons. The tablet showing her mother, the angle suggesting a warehouse near the docks. Yoon Seo's confidence, absolute and therefore vulnerable. And she understood. This was the moment Thwan had been teaching her toward. This was the executive decision, the cold arithmetic, the point where mercy became suicide. Moore pulled the pistol, and shot the man holding the tablet. The bridge erupted. Thwan moved the instant her gun fired, diving left as Yoon Seo's shot went wide. Moore dropped to her knees, firing twice more center mass. Like Thwan had taught her, no warning shots, no hesitation. One man fell, then another. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing stayed even. Some distant part of her brain noted this with clinical detachment. I'm good at this. I'm good at killing. Thwan had his own weapon out now, his shots precise, surgical. 3 more bodies. Then silence, except for the waves and the ringing in Moore's ears. Yoon Seo stood alone, her pistol wavering between targets. Blood ran down her leg from where a ricochet had found her. Her perfect composure finally cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. You taught her well, she said to Thwan, her voice tight with pain. The invisible girl learned to be seen. Moore stood, her pistol steady on Yoon Seo's chest. Where's my mother? The real location. And if I don't tell you? Moore pulled the hammer back. Then you're no longer useful, and I stop wasting time. Yoon Seo laughed, bitter and broken. You really did learn. Fine. Warehouse 14, South Dock. She's got maybe 20 minutes before my backup arrives and executes her. She smiled through blood-stained teeth. So you have a choice, little ghost. Kill me now and avenge everything I've done. Or let me live and maybe reach her in time. Thwan looked at Moore. This was her decision, her lesson, her first real moment of command. Moore thought of mercy, thought of luxury, thought of her mother tied to a chair, counting down minutes she didn't know she had. She lowered her pistol. Run, she told Yoon Seo. Run fast, run far, and pray we never see each other again. Yoon Seo stared at her, genuine surprise flickering across her face. Then she limped toward the stairs, leaving a trail of blood on the rusted deck. Thwan said nothing until she disappeared. Then, you let her go. Yes, Moore was already moving toward the gangway. Because my mother matters more than revenge, because some luxuries are worth the cost. She looked back at him. And because Yoon Seo alive and broken is more useful than Yoon Seo dead and martyred. Isn't that what you would have done? Thwan's smile was slow, dangerous and proud. You're learning faster than I expected, he said, following her into the dawn. Let's go save your mother, then we finish this properly. They found Moore's mother in Warehouse 14, unharmed but traumatized, her wrists raw from rope burns. Moore held her for exactly 30 seconds, all the time they could afford before Thwan's people arrived to take her somewhere safe, somewhere Yoon Seo's remaining allies couldn't find. I don't understand, her mother whispered, clutching Moore's hand. What's happening? Who are these people? I'm keeping us alive, Moore said and meant it. I'll explain everything when it's over. If it's ever over, she didn't add. 72 hours later, they stood outside the headquarters of Thwan's empire, a glass tower in Gangnam that bore his name on the deed, but had been operating without him for 3 weeks. Long enough for rumors of his death to calcify into accepted truth. Long enough for the board to schedule a succession meeting. Long enough for Yoon Seo to believe she'd won. She'll have security, Thwan said, adjusting his cufflinks with the precision of a man preparing for surgery. The wound on his arm had healed enough to hide beneath expensive fabric. To anyone who didn't know, he looked untouched, immortal. At least 20 people between the lobby and the boardroom. 32, Moore corrected, studying the building schematics on her phone. I counted cameras, but 18 of them are yours, the ones she couldn't buy because they have families they love more than money. Thwan glanced at her, something like respect flickering in his expression. You've been busy. You taught me to be thorough. Moore pocketed the phone. Mercy is expensive, preparation is free. They entered through the main doors at precisely 2 p.m., when the lunch crowd provided cover and the board meeting was scheduled to begin. The lobby hushed as Thwan crossed the marble floor, his footsteps echoing like a heartbeat. Employees froze. Security hands moved toward weapons, then stopped as they recognized their actual employer alive, furious, and flanked by the ghost girl who disappeared weeks ago. The receptionist, young and terrified, reached for the phone. Don't, Moore said quietly. We're expected. It wasn't true, but the girl's hand retreated anyway. They took the executive elevator, the silence between them heavy with anticipation. Moore checked her pistol one last time, the motion now automatic, muscle memory written in gunpowder and necessity. When we walk in, Thwan said, watching the floor numbers climb, they'll try to remove us. Some will draw weapons, most will freeze. His eyes met hers in the mirrored walls. Stay behind me until I give the signal. Then I do what needs doing, Moore finished. The doors opened onto the executive floor. 2 guards stood outside the boardroom. Both men Moore didn't recognize Yoon Seo's people. Imported muscle with no loyalty except to whoever paid most recently. They reached for their weapons. Thwan shot them both before they cleared their holsters. The suppressed gunfire was no louder than a cough, and the bodies crumpled with professional efficiency. Moore stepped over them without looking down. Some transformations, she'd learned, happened in the space between heartbeats. The girl who'd served water was gone. The woman who walked through corpses had taken her place. Thwan pushed open the boardroom doors. 16 people sat around the conference table, executives, accountants, lawyers, all the architecture of power that kept an empire running. At the head of the table, in Thwan's chair, sat Yoon Seo. Her leg was bandaged beneath her designer suit, her arm still favoring the shoulder where Thwan's bullet had found home. But her smile was intact, predatory, certain. Until she saw him. The color drained from her face like water from a broken glass. Gentlemen, ladies, Thwan's voice filled the room with absolute authority. I apologize for my absence. As you can see, reports of my death were premature. The board erupted with shock, relief, fear playing across faces in rapid succession. 3 executives stood, hands raised in genuine welcome. 5 others remained seated, their expressions calculating the cost of betting on the wrong successor. The rest looked at Yoon Seo, waiting for her to salvage this, to explain how the dead man was walking. She didn't speak. For the first time since Moore had met her, Yoon Seo had nothing to say. Miss Lee, Thwan addressed her formally as if she were a stranger, has been managing operations during my recovery. I'm grateful for her initiative. He moved around the table, each step deliberate. Though I'm curious about certain financial decisions made in my absence, the sale of the Busan territories, for instance, the liquidation of assets in Jeju, the rather generous contracts offered to our competitors. He nodded to Moore. She pulled the folders from her bag, the ones stolen from the gala, and spread them across the polished table. Bank transfers, contracts, photographs of betrayal documented in triplicate. These, Moore said, her voice steady, are the files proving Miss Lee has been systematically selling Chairman T's empire to the Busan syndicate. Every territory, every asset, every person is sitting at this table. Silence, the kind that precedes avalanches. One of the executives, an older man who'd served Thwan for 20 years, picked up a document. His hands shook as he read it. When he looked up, his eyes found Yoon Seo with something between rage and grief. You sold us, he whispered. You sold all of us. Yoon Seo finally moved, standing with the grace of someone who'd already calculated her exits. This is fabricated, desperate lies from a desperate man. Your signature is on every page, Moore interrupted. Your accounts received every transfer. Your encrypted phone, the one you thought was secure, backed up every message to a server we've already seized. Thwan smiled then, cold and final. You taught me something valuable, Yoon Seo. You taught me that trust is a weakness. That the people closest to you are the ones who can destroy you most thoroughly. He gestured to the documents. So I stopped trusting people and started trusting evidence. Yoon Seo's composure shattered. She lunged for the gun Moore knew she kept in her briefcase, her movements fast but not fast enough. Moore's pistol was already drawn, already aimed, already decided. Don't, Moore said softly. Yoon Seo froze, her hand inches from the briefcase. Around the table, the board members who'd been loyal to her suddenly found reasons to move away, to distance themselves from the woman who'd gambled their lives on her ambition. "You had a choice at the shipyard," Moore continued. "I gave you mercy. I gave you a chance to disappear." Her finger rested on the trigger, steady as stone. "You should have taken it." "So shoot me," Yunseo spat. "Prove you're just like us. Prove the waitress became a killer." Moore met her eyes, saw the desperation there, the fury, the absolute certainty that she'd already lost. "I don't have to prove anything," Moore said, and lowered her weapon. "Security will escort you out. You have 1 hour to leave Seoul. After that, every police officer, every prosecutor, every judge who's ever owed Chairman T a favor will receive these files. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison or running from the people you tried to sell us to." She smiled, and it was Thwan's smile, learned and perfected. "Mercy is expensive, Yunseo, but revenge is free, and I'm feeling generous today." Thwan's actual security then entered the loyal ones, the ones who'd been waiting for his signal. They took Yunseo by the arms, gentle but inexorable. As they led her past Moore, Yunseo leaned close and whispered, "You'll regret this. Mercy always comes back to kill you." "Maybe," Moore said, "but at least I'll see it coming." The doors closed behind her. The boardroom exhaled collectively. Thwan reclaimed his chair at the head of the table, settling into it like a king returning from exile. "Now," he said, his voice returning to business, "let's discuss the future, starting with my new chief operating officer." He gestured to Moore. "Some of you have met her, most of you haven't. All of you will answer to her, effective immediately." Moore felt 16 pairs of eyes turn to her, assessing, calculating, wondering how a waitress had ended up commanding an empire. She didn't explain, didn't justify, just took the empty chair beside Thwan and met their stares with the same invisibility that had once kept her safe. Except now, being invisible was a choice, a weapon, a way of being seen exactly when and how she decided. "Shall we begin?" she asked. 6 months later, Moore signed her name on documents that redirected shipping routes, authorized territorial expansions, and dissolved partnerships with a single stroke of ink. The pen was platinum, a gift from Thwan on her first official day as COO. She'd tried to refuse it too expensive, too symbolic, but he'd insisted with the same certainty he applied to all strategic decisions. "You're signing the future," he'd said. "It deserves a decent pen." Now she sat in the same penthouse where she'd first stitched his wounds, except the space no longer felt like a fortress. Books lined shelves where weapons had hung. A coffee maker occupied the counter where ammunition had been stacked. Small changes, incremental domestication of a man who'd lived like a blade for too long. Thwan entered with 2 cups, setting one beside her paperwork without comment. He'd learned she took it black, no sugar, strong enough to strip paint. Survival coffee, he called it, the kind that kept you sharp when exhaustion became dangerous. "The Busen Syndicate accepted our terms," he said, settling into the chair across from her. Between them, the glass table reflected Seoul's night sky, the city they now controlled together. "They'll withdraw from Incheon in exchange for shipping access through our ports. 15% of gross, non-negotiable." Moore reviewed the contract he slid across, her eyes catching on the clauses, the loopholes, the places where language could be weaponized later. She'd learned to read contracts the way she once read customer preferences, looking for what wasn't said, what was implied, what would come back to matter when circumstances changed. "They're giving up too easily," she observed, her pen hovering over the signature line. "Busen doesn't retreat without a countermove." "No, they don't," Thwan smiled, the expression carrying approval. "Which is why you're going to insert Clause 17C, the one about dispute resolution requiring third-party arbitration." Moore found the clause, saw the trap hidden in legal language. Any dispute would be arbitrated by a judge they'd already bought, making future conflicts essentially unwinnable for Busen. Elegant, ruthless, exactly the kind of long-game thinking that kept empires standing. She signed. "Your mother called," Thwan said, watching her signature dry. "She wants to know when you're coming to dinner." Moore's hand paused. Her mother had been relocated to a secure apartment in a quiet neighborhood, all legal fees paid, all charges mysteriously dropped after certain evidence appeared, and certain prosecutors received certain reminders about career longevity. Her mother asked questions Moore couldn't answer, looked at her daughter with confusion that bordered on grief. "She doesn't understand what I've become," Moore said quietly. "Do you?" Moore set down the pen, considered the question with the same analytical precision she now applied to everything. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible by necessity. Now she was invisible by choice, a ghost who moved through Seoul's underworld making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She'd authorized shipments, negotiated truces, and signed off on operations that existed in the spaces between legal and lethal. She'd also ensured that every employee in Thwan's restaurants received health care, that the servers got hazard pay for working in establishments that occasionally became war zones, that the invisible people, the cleaners, the cooks, the drivers had contracts protecting them from the kind of exploitation she'd once endured. Power, she'd learned, wasn't about cruelty. It was about choices, about deciding which luxuries you could afford and which necessities you refused to compromise. "I understand that I matter now," she said finally, "and mattering means being responsible for more than just myself." Thwan studied her across the table, the same way he had that first night when she'd stitched his wounds with steady hands. "You could leave," he said. "Your mother's safe. Your debts are paid. You've earned enough to disappear, start over somewhere Yoon Seo's allies will never find you." It wasn't the first time he'd offered her an exit. Moore suspected it wouldn't be the last. "And you," she asked, "would you leave if you could?" "I don't have that luxury." He gestured at the city beyond the windows, the empire they'd rebuilt from Yoon Seo's ashes. "This is what I am, what I've always been." "Then maybe," Moore said, reaching for the next contract in the stack, "I don't have that luxury either." They worked in silence after that, two people who'd saved each other's lives building something that might outlast them both. Moore signed documents authorizing territorial expansions. Thwan reviewed security protocols for vulnerable assets. The work was endless, unglamorous, the kind of administrative violence that kept empires running between the dramatic moments. At midnight, Moore's phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "I made bulgogi, your favorite. Please come home soon." Home. The word felt foreign, a language Moore had forgotten how to speak. "Go," Thwan said, not looking up from his papers. "The contracts can wait until morning." Moore stood, gathering her things, but paused at the door. "That pen you gave me, the platinum one." "What about it?" "It's too expensive, too symbolic." She smiled, small and genuine. "I'm keeping it anyway." Thwan's laugh was rare enough to be valuable. "You're learning." Moore left the penthouse and took the elevator down to street level, where a car waited to take her across the river to her mother's apartment. She'd visit for an hour, eat bulgogi, answer questions with carefully constructed half-truths. Her mother would look at her with confusion and love, unable to reconcile the daughter who'd served water with the woman who now signed documents in blood and ink. But Moore would go anyway, because mercy was expensive, and she decided it was a luxury worth the cost. The city passed outside the car, windows neon and shadow, wealth and desperation, the same Seoul she'd always known, but now understood differently. Every building had a story. Every corner held a negotiation. Every person moved through webs of power they couldn't see, influenced by decisions made in penthouses by people like her. People who'd started as invisible and chosen to be seen. Moore pulled out her phone and opened a new document, beginning to draft tomorrow's agenda. There were territories to secure, alliances to forge, competitors to neutralize through economic pressure rather than violence. The work never ended. The ledger never balanced completely. But she was no longer just surviving the system. She was writing it. And that, Moore thought as the car crossed the Han River, was its own kind of victory, imperfect, expensive, and entirely hers. The platinum pen felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder that some transformations couldn't be undone. That the girl who'd poured water at table 4 was gone, replaced by a woman who poured power into documents that reshaped a city. She didn't mourn the loss. She'd learned that mercy and ruthlessness weren't opposites. They were tools, equally valuable, both necessary for survival in a world where invisibility was a choice and mattering was a weapon. Moore arrived at her mother's apartment building and looked up at the lighted window where dinner waited. For 1 hour, she'd be a daughter. Then she'd return to the penthouse and be what she'd become, a ghost who commanded shadows, a waitress who'd learned to serve justice instead of water. The ledger would balance eventually, or it wouldn't. Either way, Moore had signed her name to it, in platinum ink that couldn't be erased. And she was finally, terribly, beautifully visible.